Ben Ortlip is back 2 years later as the author of the best-selling book, Culture is the New Leadership, what every leader needs to know about engagement, performance, and organizational effectiveness. He's also the creator and founder of the Culture MRI, the first data-driven method to look behind the curtain of what's really happening in a company and tie it into a financial ROI. Finally, companies have a way to find out what's been missing and a way to measure culture and build a sought-after workplace. So, Ben, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. So great to be here.
It's great to have you back. You know, culture has been a hot topic when we talked 2 years ago, and it's still continuing on. I believe that we should all get to have the experience to be part of a company where people want to work. Because a couple of reasons. One is it allows the company to move forward and save lots of resources that we're spending unnecessarily. And you aren't always having to replace people walking out the door. And you aren't struggling to find that right talent. So I don't know if you know this, but in our last conversation, which all of you listening, if you want to go back and listen to that, it's episode 31. But Ben, your episode, our interview that we had, was in the top 10 episodes of all of the shows that I've done. So it definitely has a reason that people are listening to. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. Yeah. We're all trying to figure out culture, that's for sure.
We really are. And I also want to congratulate you on this new book. It is both fascinating and enjoyable. And I particularly liked the story about how you were part of Woodstock. So there you go, folks. You wanted to read that.
That's right.
I was thinking, oh my gosh, only Ben.
Yeah. It was a weird trip.
It was.
But I was there.
Yeah, pretty cool. So we're going to make you read the book to figure out what happened there with Ben. But there's so much in the media about culture every day. And what I want to know is, because we're talking about it, because there's so much in the media, what caused you to write this book, and why is this book on culture different?
Yeah. Well, I can't mention that. I can't give you the answer to that question without mentioning the fact that I was drawn into this. This was never like, hey, I think I want to get into culture. That sounds interesting. I was ghostwriting for smart people and just taking jobs where the action was. And that led me into writing for thought leaders around management and leadership and so forth. So once I was immersed in that community, working with these people, trying to, deal with their ideas, create product extensions and things like that, I started noticing the word culture coming up. It became part of the lexicon. And this happened probably in the early aughts, was when I really started noticing it pick up. But I noticed, too, that they lacked the mastery when talking about culture that they did with talking about management or leadership. In the world of management and leadership, there's so many constructs. There's key principles. There's frameworks. There's these sort of finite modules of learning that they all study in school, and you get an MBA and all that kind of stuff. But when it came to culture, it was sort of people's way of saying there's this third element, this dimension. And we don't really know what it is, but it's like the way people talk about personality. Yeah. You could talk about the demographic part of somebody, like this person is a Caucasian, they're 6'2", they, have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they're left-handed and all that. But then when you really want to talk about the person, you start describing their personality. And unless you're using typology language, you're going to start saying things that are more conversational. Well, the same thing was happening with the word culture. Became this sort of category where we're sort of free to, ramble extemporaneously about the things that we describe as, this is what the company's really like. But I watched these people struggle with that. And then that all came to a head one day when one of my ghostwriting clients said, hey, I want to write a book about culture. I was so excited that I was going to learn, finally, what is this thing that they keep talking about? And long story short, after a year of working on a book, we both kind of fired each other because at that point we didn't have enough mastery of the topic to even write a book. And so that's how I ended up in this, because I just couldn't get it. I was just flabbergasted that there was this thing that was so central to all these conversations, but we had no lexicon for it. We had none of the handles that we have with other things. And I just really felt like, this should be something that we can master, and to the same degree that we do these other, I call them organizational disciplines. There's no reason that we shouldn't be able to create operational systems for sustaining culture and things like that. And that may have been a little ambitious, audacious, or even naive, but it stuck with me. And so when I would do work with companies, I just sort of had this automatic filter running in the background. It was constantly picking up cues from things. But in a way, so it bit me and I couldn't let it go. And it was this sort of tinkering, lingering question of, can you figure this out? So I had a lot of fun with it. And lo and behold, I had some lightning bolt moments along the way, where I received sort of a divine revelation, these key insights. That led to the framework. That led to me connecting it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the concept that the needs of workers totally determines their engagement. When someone's workplace needs aren't met, they automatically begin to shut down. Mm-hmm. So all of these concepts were starting to come together. And what I noticed about the conversations, and even the way that companies were approaching culture, and even the way that people were starting to write books about culture, I noticed that there was no sort of comprehensive approach. Mm-hmm. There were little nuggets of good ideas, but there was no all-encompassing framework or worldview, so that you could know for sure that what you were doing was going to predictably, consistently, and sustainably create the culture that the organization needed. So that's how I got into it. It was kind of an accident, if you want to call it that. It was kind of providence, if that's your description for it. But it was never something I set out to do. It was kind of like the needs of the times determined my destiny in that. So.
Yes, I don't believe in accidents. I think it was all timing and just meant to happen. So I'm really looking at that book coming in because it is so distinctively different. I've been talking to a lot of people about culture. Some of them have been on the show. I've been on the podcast previously. And one thing that I know is we know that culture can have an impact. And we know that we can hold up companies that have these great cultures and ask them how you did it. But it's hard to bring that idea from a leader and bring it into your company. It's really hard to get our hands around that definition. But one of the reviews of the book that really struck me said Ben Ortlip has been able to demystify culture. So why are we struggling so hard to define what culture is?
Yeah, so it's a very complex sort of arena. If you think about it, there's so many things. It's like a butterfly effect, mm-hmm. and it's different in every organization. So there's all these myriad factors that come together to create culture, just like with personalities. An individual personality is the combination of, your upbringing, your intelligence, your experiences in life, the values that were instilled in you, and then your circumstances that you're hurled into at any given moment. Those shape your personality. In the same way with organizations. Imagine an organization as it travels through time in its marketplace. There's different leaders coming in, there's different employees, and they bring their personal cultures into it. So it's a constantly evolving, very complex sort of algorithm, if you will. And I think that's why it's been so difficult for us to understand the butterfly effects that come from all these different nuancing factors that hit the organization at any given time. And the key to really, understanding it is let's go ahead and let's catalog all of those things. Let's measure them. Let's watch the impact that they have on each other. Let's decide which ones matter to the equation, and let's decide which ones don't. Let's weight the ones according to how they impact it. So, to me, that's the key, is we have to dig in and do the hard work of understanding what comprises culture, and how do all the pieces fit together. And that was sort of the dream I had. I saw the same thing in leadership, when I learned about leadership from some of the great thinkers, when I learned about management from some of the great thinkers. That's how they approached it. They said, here's the 5 things, or here's the 7 things that really matter. And here's what you do with those, and here's their relationships to each other. So, but that's why we struggled with it, is because it's overwhelming. And it takes a combination of organizational effectiveness. You have to bring this mindset of how do you run an organization, but then you have to connect it with sort of cultural anthropology, organizational psychology, and human efficacy, personal efficacy and motivation. You have to sort of combine all of those things and mix them together. And that's just a complex expectation to have for anybody who's, doing their regular day job. I just happen to be in a position where that sort of was my day job. That was I was at the intersection of writing about a lot of those different things, and I just happened to have the curiosity for human behavior. That the curiosity stuck with me through working with different companies. And I just felt like, I wanted us to have this. One of the reasons I wanted us to have this is, my own personal experience and disappointment with corporate opportunities as an employee, and just seeing, and of course, knowing people. Think about it too. In the 90s was the sort of the big Dilbert explosion and the demotivator posters and all of this stuff. We were all sort of sick of work, which kind of is where the whole Woodstock story you reference comes in. But I considered it a humanitarian crisis that so many people wake up every day just almost in prison for the life that they've, experienced for themselves. So, their best dream was to pursue a career in a certain direction, but now they're subject to an organization that may or may not care about, helping them have a quality of life. And so I think we can do a lot better. I think that organizations should do a lot better. And now we're getting to a point where organizations have to do a lot better, or they're not going to survive. We're looking at, one of the people that I'm working with right now, I have some clients in higher education, and, they're all facing what we call this demographic cliff. And that's going to follow and hit the workplace. So the war for talent's not getting any lighter over the next few years. The population is heading in the direction of that, being even more competitive than ever. So the organizations that are going to win are the ones who solve the humanitarian crisis, who are attractive to the employee, that are out there looking for jobs. But it's hard. It's hard work, and hopefully we're making it a lot easier.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm seeing it from where I sit, because a lot of my clients that come to me have left corporate for several different reasons, whether it was their own decision or the decision was made for them. They are feeling like they can't be their real selves there anymore. They're being asked to do things that go against their values. And so they feel like their only solution, their only option is to leave and start their own company. And I'm here to tell you, and I know both you and I know, we need people to work for these companies. And it shouldn't be that people are being driven from them. We have to figure out what is going to change it. And we all know that we don't change until the pain gets severe enough that we are forced to change. And I think that's what you're talking about with these companies. They will get to the point where they don't have a choice, but they have to do something.
I think the marketplace is always going to be comprised of independent people, but also interdependence is always going to play a key role in that. I mean, there are certain things that only large institutional entities can and should accomplish. And so it requires of us, and even if you're on your own, you have to have some semblance of interdependent skills. So independence is not the solution ultimately, that everybody, it's not like we all reach self-actualization and that means, there's only small businesses from now on.
Right.
Small businesses have to create culture too. And I just think that if people can understand where their impulses and natural motivations are coming from, and my argument, and the one thing I want people to remember is that needs drive everything. Our core human needs, and especially the needs as they pertain to work, there's a finite set of those that you can evaluate in order to determine if a job meets your needs, or if you're an employer, there's a finite set of those needs that you can measure to determine how well the organization is partnering with its employees to allow them to thrive. If people's needs aren't met, they can't thrive, and it immediately causes them to shut down or to go look elsewhere to have their needs met.
Yeah.
It's just a human reality.
And Ben, you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy. Just a few episodes ago, I recorded a full episode about reaching your potential and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which he developed in the 60s. And the idea was self-actualization was at the top of the triangle. We had our basic human needs, food, water, clothing, shelter. Then it went on to safety, then love and belonging, then esteem, and finally self-actualization. But the idea at that point was he didn't feel like many people would reach that level. However, in 2018, there was some research done that I discovered that said many people have reached that level and are going beyond into self-transcendence. So I thought it was so delightful when I opened up your book, and one of the very first things you mentioned is how we have become self-actualized at work. Could you speak a little bit to that? What does that look like?
To me, the primary aha there is, if you think back, so I looked at every civilization that's in recorded history, and if you think about it, this is the first time in the history of mankind that the population as a whole, the workplace, if you will, exists in what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. Previously, and this is another reason why this is such a confusing, challenging time for employers, we've never had to solve or face this problem before. In the past, the workplace was really existing in what Maslow would have called the survival realm. The agrarian societies, those were only 150 years ago. We were 50% or more of the workplace was involved in raising food. And just making sure that there was food on the table. Think about it. 150 years ago, you couldn't travel 20 miles from home without some kind of logistical plan for there were no travel centers or, fast food joints at every exit and things like that. So your mindset back then was, one of tremendous dependence. And as a result of that, companies could really lean into their authority because they owned the contract, the employer contract, the sort of social contract that exists between employer and employee. And over time that changed. And, management was the ultimate tool to sort of form the operating system for companies during that time. But then over about 50 years, the needs of people sort of evolved, just like Maslow said it would. And so they started wanting things in sort of what we call the psychosocial layer of Maslow's hierarchy. And they wanted esteem. They wanted recognition. They wanted to know that there was a future, advancement, things like that. So the contract has to change. And that's when leadership sort of emerged as the operating system for organizations. It didn't replace management, but it augmented it. Management didn't go away completely. Well, so now, after 50 years of leadership books dominating the bookstore and the thinking of training of the people who run companies, it's evolved again. And, so we have this workplace of, the employees are all facing self-actualization, and they want things like significance, meaning. They want to master skills. They want to belong to communities, not just have a job and show up. And so companies have to up their game, and they have to provide a different social contract, one that understands all of that. It can't neglect the management disciplines too. It has to maintain those. And so, transcendence, to me, there's a line between self-actualization and transcendence. It's a little bit blurry because there's an element of transcendence in self-actualization.
Yes.
But the point is true that the population has moved way up. That's my takeaway from it. People are definitely closer to the top of Maslow's hierarchy than they were 100 years ago. And companies need to transform the contracts that they have with employees, or else they're going to have a disconnect. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the Great Resignation. That's exactly what we're seeing in the war for talent. Is there's a change in the needs that people have from a workplace, and therefore it's required of companies to offer a better employee value proposition, one that meets those needs.
Yes. And I think I was sharing a story not long ago with you that, I'm hearing more and more of people that are applying to companies. And it's not just 1 or 2 interviews. It is 5 and 6 and 7, even more rounds of interviews. These companies are going above and beyond to try to get to the crux of who is this person I'm hiring. And then when they hire them, they don't stay. And they keep thinking it's the talent that they can't find the right people. But as I'm thinking about the person interviewing them, I'm thinking, well, how about look behind you? What is it behind you that you're bringing to meet that new employee? And maybe the problem is not the employee. Maybe it's something else you need to look at, in the rearview mirror there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a two-way street. And especially with the competitive, hiring market that there seems to be growing even more. So companies have to bring something to the table, and that's not historically something they're used to doing. They're used to holding all the cards. They have the 3-part progression that we've noticed. What we call it is, the companies used to lean into their authority. And then there was a season when they sort of transitioned from authority to influence in terms of the social contract. But now there's an element of autonomy that really speaks to the needs of its people. And really, I think that autonomy was a first round solution. I don't think it's really autonomy that people want. People want compatibility with their employers. They don't want autonomy and independence. They still want interdependence with a hiring organization. So I think we're going to see that word diminish in the conversations. The first, I remember Dan Pink's book Drive was so influential. The 3 things that he was claiming, which I think is accurate: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I don't think that autonomy has its place in the conversation today. I think mastery and purpose still do, but I think that autonomy, or I think a better word is self-actualization. And then I think that the other 3 sort of flavors of ice cream are the different expressions of autonomy, or, that's where we have craft, cause, and community. That's how I understand the language and how it's evolved in the 20 years since Pink's book. But clearly it's changed.
Yeah, it really is. And so, I know when we look at the title of your book, Culture is the New Leadership, that's a pretty bold statement to make. But clearly, the management and leadership that we've been through had its time and place. But it is time for something new.
And I think the title of the book just, that's an attempt to encourage people to think of cultures not as just sort of a almost frivolous, superficial conversation that you add to other things. Yeah. That's a response from me and colleagues like me to say, hey, wait a minute, there's more to culture than we've been looking at. Initially people thought of culture as almost the lipstick and rouge that you add to the experience that employees have or that the customer sees. But it goes much deeper than that. And so the messages we're trying to say is, this is the new organizational discipline. Culture is like leadership has been the defining organizational discipline for the last 50 years or so. Really, we're going to see for the next 50 years, the defining discipline is culture. And instead of thinking of it as just some extracurricular layer that we put on the organization, it's actually a full-blown discipline, but you have to understand all the componentry and how to approach that. There are things you must do. There's a bag of responsibilities, and you have to learn all of them, and you have to monitor all of them in order to have success as an organization. The analogy that I like is the FAA doesn't give you a pilot's license because you're really good at one or two of the components of aviation. You have to prove mastery in a whole set of disciplines, most of which will never come into play. But you still have responsibility in case they do. Otherwise, people die. So,
and I'm glad they do.
and careers die if we don't bring that same mindset to culture and organizational effectiveness.
Yes. Yeah.
Not to mention companies. EBITDA and profitability are on the line too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, people have been listening to this culture. They've been trying to maybe mimic what other companies are doing, but what is it that most companies get wrong when they try to address culture, Ben?
Most companies, if they get it wrong, by the way, I don't mean to sound like everybody's got it wrong, but right. I think the misnomer that has defined those who maybe fall short is understanding causality. It's not enough to simply do things that help culture. It's most important to really understand causality. What are the different components? And how does each one, impact culture in our organization at this moment in time? What exactly is the state of each of those? Because you can't really, this is where the concept of the MRI comes in. It's an effort on our part to name this something that communicated the mindset behind it. The MRI stands for what we call the Motivational Response Index, which is the name of our framework. The sort of metaphor there is to say that, if you have a sick person, you don't just cut them open and start whacking randomly. You take a full diagnostic snapshot of where the good tissue is, where the bad tissue is, so that you can accurately apply the treatments, the therapies, the methodologies that will address the situation. So that's a great approach to bring to organizational effectiveness. Let's take a full diagnostic look at the organization. Where are the people engaged? Where are they disengaged? And most importantly, why? We need to know exactly what's going on before we spend our valuable limited resources addressing a problem. We had a client recently, a few years ago, that had on their own independently decided that, one of the reasons our people are leaving is because there's more competitive pay elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So we came in and we did, actually before we got there, the company made the decision to throw another, I think 8% into payroll just across the board. We're going to give people more rate, more money. And so we came in and did the culture MRI and understood what was really driving the culture were not unmet needs in terms of compensation, but unmet needs in terms of operational issues. There was some disefficiencies in certain areas. And our research found that, after a year, they had the same problem, the same level of turnover, the same level of disengagement. So we came in and we showed them the causality of it. And all they had done was they had wasted 8% of their labor budget with this raise and reset the expectation for what pay would be in the organization and still had the problem. So it's imperative to look at the true causality. I think that's the main thing that most companies get wrong is they don't understand it as a holistic, comprehensive proposition that requires that you really understand causality before you take action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really getting to the root of what's going on rather than coming in from the top and let's create a mission statement and paint it on a wall and let's move forward.
Yeah, it's not like planning, a weekend party or a tailgate, anything. It's like, let's just come up with 5 good ideas to make things fun and better.
Yeah.
And that'll be a success. That's just an oversimplification of things.
Yeah. So one other point in the book, you say culture is money. Yet, typically, I think we all know that when this topic comes up, we see leaders moving that topic out of the boardroom, down the hall to the HR department. What is going on there?
Well, I think traditionally culture was thought of as a people component, and therefore it ought to be owned by HR. And I think certainly it needs to be in sync with what HR is doing. But when you start to understand the direct correlation between culture and profitability and EBITDA, then it suddenly moves back up to the C-suite because it's such a strategic undertaking. So, culture is money is the section in the book where we, present the case for the relationship between the two. And that's the reason that we feel like you need to quantify it. You need to understand not only are we measuring causality, but we're exposing the impact in US dollars. We're saying, we can measure this stuff in terms of the dollar impact to the company. So that's the fact that HR is still a part of the conversation for sure. But it's not just some tactical thing that they can take on without respect to the overarching strategy.
Yeah, it really does. It impacts everything in the company: profitability, employee retention, customer satisfaction, all of that. If our employees are not having their needs met and engaged. And on that topic, Ben, why care about engagement, and what does culture do for engagement? Can you maybe give us some examples?
Yeah. So, what culture does for engagement, I would choose to clarify some language there. I like to distinguish between culture and the employee value proposition, because culture is really the overarching, the topic and the organizational discipline where these things live. The role that engagement plays is that really engagement drives performance. And performance determines profitability and organizational effectiveness. So the thing that drives engagement is essentially the employee value proposition and how well it directly dovetails with the needs of those people who are delivering the work. The exception might be if there's an organization where people don't matter as much to the equation. Mm-hmm. You know, if you've got all these robots cranking out widgets and that's your business model, there might be an exception to that. But to the extent that an organization is driven by, dependent on, and shaped by the performance of its people, the culture of those people that sort of always forms around, you know, the interaction between humans, it's going to affect the output of the company.
Yeah, I think that is really the bottom line with it. And when we look at what our engagement is right now, what is employee engagement? What is the statistic on that now, Ben?
The numbers since 1990 have hovered in what's essentially a flat line around 30%. And there's, you know, degree of difficulty, a change of, you know, 3 or 4% in any given direction. Internationally, the numbers used to be a lot worse. They were in the low teens. They've somehow changed either in the way that they're measured or just the globalization has brought it up to more of a westernized norm. But still, we're talking about more than 2/3 of the workforce is not engaged. So some are actively disengaged. Some are in some form of malaise. But that's a report card on organizations, you know, presenting a value proposition that enables their people to thrive and perform. You know, I wouldn't argue that people should be scoring 100% in engagement. I mean, you know, we all have imperfections and people have other things that engage them, families, responsibilities, life is hard in general. But we ought to be doing better than 30%, especially since it's been this, you know, alarm bell that's been going off since 1990, the first year that Gallup did the Q12 survey. Those numbers haven't changed. And you know, it's like healthcare, you know, this is great news for the consulting business, for the industry that speaks and pours resources into that. But it's kind of like the way, you know, the healthcare system doesn't make any money off of healthy people or dead people. It's in the middle where people are sick and so you know, if you're a consultant, you need sick organizations, to make a living. So, you know, and it's kind of the consulting, the assessments are done by the people in the consulting business. So maybe there's some disincentives to actually doing something about it. And we end up just reminding people that they're sick and they need our help. But I think we ought to move past that at this point. We ought to get to the place where we're actually making progress and showing organizations exactly what they can do.
And I think, you know, if it's been since 1990, we've been trying to address it. If only 30% of our workforce is engaged, that means 70% of our labor dollars are going somewhere, but it's not to the organization for the output in that. But, you know, I think the thing today, Ben, is like our leaders today didn't learn about this in their MBAs.
Right.
But they're hearing about it everywhere. So how can these leaders, you know, whether it's pulling in consultants to help them with this, what is the Culture MRI and how can the Culture MRI help them with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure the Culture MRI helps in the sense that, you know, bring us in and we'll make this happen for you. If you want to learn about it, you know, the reason that I wrote a book is because I feel like this mentality, this approach and mindset needs to be more proliferated in the business world today. So eventually this will be taught in schools. Eventually, I don't know if they'll have MBA and PhDs in culture for the workplace, but certainly they have that already for, anthropology at large. But I think this will become, in 20 years, I think this is going to be common mindset for people that run organizations. They're going to embrace, instead of people being this mysterious, untenable, unmanageable element that happens, that descends upon companies, regardless of their operational strategies, they're going to start to see it as something that's manageable. In fact, if you look at the post-industrial workplace, there's been sort of these epochs, if you will. At first we sort of mastered the product development, if you will. There was a season during which we're figuring out how to design different products. And we're still doing a lot of that, the technology boom and things like that, and advancements in technology continue to reinvent that. But that was sort of, from a baseline, the first of the disciplines that we had to manage as organizations. And remember, we're talking about the fact that before the Industrial Revolution, there really weren't any large companies. There were, like we have today. Today, we have these massive global entities. So all of this is new to us as of 150 years ago. But the second sort of discipline that we took on was processes. And, if you think about, the assembly line and things like that, or, ISO 9002, these sort of constructs, Lean and Six Sigma and all that. Those are all process improvements. So we had product and process. And the third sort of leg of the stool for organizations is its people. And that's something we've never quite managed, unless you consider that we had, a general authority-driven value proposition for the people component. We're going to tell you what the hell to do, and you're going to do it, or else we're going to, kick you out and get the next guy. And then we had this influence thing where it's like, we're still using some authority with certain components of our workforce, but we're sort of doing a strike and an influence deal with people. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, now we're at a point where even that isn't sufficient for all workforces, all elements of the workforce and their mindset. So it changes again, and forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah, but it does. It brings it back to the employee, which everyone in the company fits in that role. Everyone in the company is an employee of the company. So it brings it from the leader to really where it impacts everyone. And I think that's really spot on with that. The other thing is, it's not lost on me that you have this medical diagnostic test name for the Culture MRI. How do you work with companies to administer the Culture MRI, Ben? What does that look like?
So the concept behind what we do is we're trying to be able to map an organization based on the framework that we have. The real key to the whole thing is the framework. The framework is sort of a Maslow's hierarchy for the organization. Where are the people? Where are they in terms of how their needs are being met? So we issue a simple assessment. We coil at the notion of that's an engagement survey, although it kind of is. But it's a very strategic causality-based engagement survey. It's not just, hey, we got a number, and we've got some categories. We want to understand the dollar impact based on each of the categories where things can go. We also do some field work. We do sort of ethnographic interviews where we're capturing user stories behind the data so that we can give very specific feedback in our reporting around what's causing specific to the organization. So we can describe routines that are broken. We can describe mindsets that are counterproductive, so that the organization comes away with a set of custom remediation steps and things that they can do. So the process is that simple. We poll the organization. It spits out a report with very specific strategies that they can employ, and it gives them benchmarks to measure before and after, and also to understand the ROI potential of different investments. So if we recommend, an overhaul of something in the organization, then, you can look at a projection of what that's going to do if they undertake that investment. So if it's $50,000 to replace a system, to do a time motion study, to train certain people for an additional, set of training, you can look at the cost of that training, but then you can foresee the impact that it has before you invest in it. If there's an ROI there, then you can, as a CFO, you can authorize that to go forward. If there's not, then, obviously save the money and don't allocate it for that. But you're no longer guessing about what something's going to do. You're now looking at it in a very quantifiable situation.
Yes. And I think, you're exactly right. The CFO, you do have their attention because you can see directly what is causing that issue and being able to address it. So, Ben, I've been an advocate of the Culture MRI for a few years now, and I often am on a call and having to mention to someone, hey, let me show you this website. And when I show them the motivational response index that looks a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they lean in, they get really excited about it because they see what exactly goes into measuring culture. But when their eyes light up is when I show them the dashboard. And so, folks, if you get a chance, go to theculturemri.com to look at this. But Ben, tell us what is on that dashboard that you think people are getting excited about.
Well, a lot of people are surprised and excited when they see that we're converting it to the dollar impact to the company. But essentially, we do look at an overall engagement score because engagement equals EBITDA. And so that's the first thing is we're looking at, hey, are these people engaged or not? And if so, how much? And if not, how little? The second thing we're looking at is causality. Again, not only knowing that they are or aren't engaged, but specifically, what can we do about it? Where is that coming from? And so that's where the framework comes in. You have to be able to pinpoint the causality behind disengagement or engagement. The other thing that people get excited about is the idea of saying, hey, if your engagement is 55, let's say, and you're spending $100 million on labor costs, just paying people's salaries, and maybe if you want to count benefits, we can look at the engagement score because our algorithms know the exact relationship between engagement or performance. And if you're spending $100 million, but you're only getting an engagement score of 55, then that means your $100 million is only netting about $82 million in terms of performance. Whereas a fully engaged workforce would give you the full $100 million worth of effort. So, where that's handy, that sounds so far like a fun anecdote, but what we can do is we can say that a 1% shift in engagement is going to change that outcome number too. So, up front, we can say, here's where you are, and we can project that if we can raise your engagement score by 10 points and make it go from 55 to 65 even, that's going to have a return to the company in profitability and or EBITDA of, X dollars. So let's say it goes from, it'll take us from 82 million to, 96 million or something like that. So, right there you have a projected ROI, and we can look at the cost because we can chase down the causality and get really targeted with where that's coming from, we could project the cost of fixing that. So we can look at the strategies that come back. And so if I'm the CFO or the strategic team, and you present to me that, I could make a $10 million improvement in EBITDA and profitability, and the cost of doing that is going to be, it's going to be $150,000. And we're going to measure before and after to make sure that it actually happened. That's a whole different ballgame from, I think, if we change the color of the conference room from pink to fuzzy purple, that, people are going to do better. So now that's just a more quantifiable approach to culture. So that's on the dashboard. We're measuring those things. We're also looking at just general projected turnover, because most companies deal with turnover. And, as a separate cost center, we can also say that based on your engagement score, you're headed for this percentage of turnover, given your industry and the different roles that people play in the company. And that's been scary accurate. And that's a separate over and above cost that the organization faces, depending on what turnover costs them.
Yeah, really, when you think about the amount of resources that goes into when somebody leaves, having to replace them, onboard them, the collateral damage that happens as a result of all of that, to be able to get ahead of that would be so amazing, I think, particularly today. So, Ben, this is a topic that obviously we could go on quite a long bit about. And the whole thing is not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone needs to be independent, that we do need people working in companies. So one thing I would like to do is, if you are game for it, is to invite you to join me as we continue this discussion. And it would be a way for our audience who has listened to this. I know this will be a very interesting episode for people, but people are going to have questions. If you would come on a LinkedIn Live, or maybe several, where we could allow people to ask questions, would that be of interest?
Yeah. Yeah, we could go on and on forever, and I will be, whether on talking to you about it or not. I mean, this is not a hobby anymore. So,
no.
Yeah, that's great. Let's do it.
Okay, that's so great. So what we'll do is, this episode is scheduled to air mid-September. So look for us a few weeks after that on the Culture MRI company page. So I urge you to connect with the Culture MRI company page on LinkedIn. You can connect with me, Lisa McGuire, on my LinkedIn page. And Ben, I'm sure you're fine connecting with people on yours as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. So thanks so much for being with us today. Ben, is there anything else you'd like to say, somewhere you want to point people to?
I just want to say, please, people, for the sake of your own career, understand what drives engagement for you personally. And if you're in charge of other people and their employment experience, think about the position, the opportunity that you have to impact other people's lives. It's a tremendous opportunity and a responsibility.
Yeah, it certainly is, and can have a ripple effect for a very long time. So, Ben, your book is Culture is the New Leadership. I believe we can go to theculturemri.com/book, and there we can find information about the book, where to get it. And I think you've got some free resources on there too, right?
That's right. You can download the prologue to the book, and you can download the epilogue to the book. And that may be all you need. But yeah, you can download those for free as a PDF, I think, and find out if you're interested in the rest of the book.
Yes, and I will tell you, I've read the rest of the book. You do want to read it, because he breaks down all these things in a very easy to read way. So thanks so much. That's going to wrap it up for here. This season, we've been talking about reinvention stories. And I want to note that reinvention doesn't mean burning it all down to start over. Sometimes we have to shift our perspective. It requires us to look at the root of what's really going on in ourselves and in our companies. And the solution could be right under our nose. Yet we're looking out everywhere else for answers, but we've got the answer right behind us, maybe, or even inside. So if you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to share with others. Reach out to Ben, reach out to me. Let us know what you like about it. Let us know if you have any questions, and would love to know what resonated with you. And if you get a chance, go back to episode 31. Again, it's been a very popular episode. You'll get some more on the basics of the Culture MRI. So until next week, I invite you to take time to consider what lights you up. That is your passion. How can you take that and leave an imprint on others? That's your purpose. And how you show up to impact the world is how we know you as your personal brand of integrity. That's it. Thanks for joining us today.